Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the BSMA Digital Transformation Roundtable. Today, we've got a really interesting topic for discussion. And so we're going to be talking about Illumina's digital supply chain transformation, overcoming pitfalls and embracing opportunities. And today, joining me on the platform is Leon Trevette, Senior Director of Global Supply Chain Planning with Illumina, and Sabu Panagrahi, Senior Director of Pharmaceutical Development and Manufacturing with Gilead Sciences. The one thing we like to do today in terms of how we structure this, we don't want this to be a webinar. This is not a one side standing and delivering a talking head. We're actually going to engage you and allow you to engage the participants. The goal here is for us all to learn and develop together. So Leon is going to start with about 10 to 15 minutes of monologue, giving us sort of a baseline of what Illumina has done and are doing. And then Sabu is going to respond likewise with respect to his perspectives from a Gilead. And then after that, we'll open up. I'll have a series of questions that I'll ask. And then I know Leon is going to really be appreciative of feedback that we can give him as members of this roundtable. So it's an opportunity for us all to share as well as to learn. We do ask that in light of the fact that we might have competitors here, let's try to steer clear of anything that would get us in trouble here from a compliance standpoint. So we'll try not to talk about products and providers and suppliers and so forth, and we'll keep it as general as we possibly can. So again, thank you for joining us today, and we're going to go ahead, and Leon, I'm going to kick it over to you. I think you're muted.
You're still muted, Leon.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't get it, the cursor there. So welcome everybody. Sorry for the technology challenge there. Clearly a digital opportunity for me with Zoom. I was really interested in participating in this. Randy kind of alluded to it, but I'm really interested and value feedback from you all in terms of the challenges and opportunities or just questions around some of the things that we're doing. But to frame that, what I really wanted to do was just try and give an idea of our methodology of how we approach putting this together and see if there's any opportunities there. So as I go to the next slide, what I really wanted to emphasize here was the digital strategy is part of an overall supply chain strategy. So we have a 2025 vision in our supply chain of multiple different work streams. We want to make sure that we're socially responsible. We think about client compliance. We are collaborative. We've got scale and efficiency. And the last one, which I should honestly know off the top of my head, but the screen is hiding it for me, the stupid Mac. The last one, what is the last one? Can you, somebody call it out to me, Randy? The people, yeah, of course, sorry, that underpins it all. The people strategy around how we're gonna do that. And then digitally connected. So it's part of our core strategy and not an afterthought. So we built that in so that we had the management commitment, the leadership, and it wasn't just a buzzword that we were going to go, well, we're doing a digital transformation because we're implementing certain different things. It's part of our core supply chain vision, mission, strategy. And we tried to put some words around what does it mean. And we came up with an predictive end-to-end supply chain, significantly increasing our capability to drive that value and improve agility. So if I break that down, what we essentially landed at is multiple different work streams. So we thought about the customer at one side. We thought about supply chain customer experience. Can we give a better customer experience if we help them manage their inventory? And in the business that we're in, there's multiple different customers, multiple different personas. There's big sequencing factories, big companies that have lots of fleets of instruments and do big sequencing, and you've got small universities that are doing it. So there's different scales, but how can we really enrich that experience by seeing if there's technology that we can enable to manage their inventory for them a little better. We've also got an opportunity in logistics, distribution and transportation. How can we get better real-time information? How can we make sure that the condition of the products that we're shipping, goes to the customer in the right condition? And then also, can we use technology to optimize our network? And we start to talk about digital twins and scenario planning and modeling. Sourcing, we're really thinking about the strategic collaborations with our suppliers and how we can leverage digitization to improve. Getting better end-to-end visibility, we could call it control tower, we can call it digital intelligent visibility. Oops, sorry, on screen. Also mobility, can we get at this access, this information and access it real time anywhere? Thinking about advanced analytics, how can we get more predictive and potentially prescriptive and use AI tools and things there? And about advanced planning and optimization, is there an area there that we can kind of focus in on? We broke it down into all of these work streams. The other thing to call out that each of those other breakthrough objectives, that's what the BTO stands for, in scale and efficiency, growth, compliance, CSR, and people. If there's any technology requirements there, we need to kind of capture that up as well, so that we can deliver those solutions. And the other thing is we did recognize the difference between digitized and digital. Digitization being, leveraging, driving efficiency, but digital technology is about unlocking new value propositions with the speed and connect that we get that's constantly advancing. So each of these different work streams, we tried to visualize in some sort of, we'll call it an infographic or something that was loads of words that you could kind of get your head around. And we kind of came up with this rainbow type thing. And on the left-hand side, we kind of have the supplier and our interrelationship there. How can we be collaborative in terms of forecasting and inventory management? And this second kind of bow of the rainbow was some of the ideas that we kind of came up with around digital capabilities. We had a brainstorm. We had little areas: supplier, inbound transportation, manufacturing, 3PLs, customers, and said, what capabilities are out there? What are the sort of things that we know in each of our functional areas we might have an opportunity with? And we started to populate this kind of middle bow there of the rainbow with some of the capabilities. And then in that center, we were starting to think, well, how do we think about things from a strategic lens? Is there any capabilities there when you look at the bow that we need to be able to think about? Is it about, optimization, digital twinning of all of this? Or is it about how we, think about it fitting into enterprise kind of thing? So supply chain, and think about it, how it fits in with everything else. Then you kind of get into the tactical realm. So we started to think about integrating things, integrated business planning as an example. And then obviously we go to that operational level. And there's a big part of mobility that comes in there. How can I be more fluid in my distribution and logistics functions, and use technology to do a lot more transactions or elements of automation and that sort of stuff? So we tried to visualize it, and then we kind of put the control tower up there at the top to give us this end-to-end visibility. Let me go to the next slide. Oops. One other thing that we did do is we went through all of that, and we had an idea about our capabilities that we needed, but we needed a bit of validation. So we partnered actually with Gartner and looked at a few frameworks and just had a quick session, and looked at some of the key principles around it. So are we looking end to end? And are we finding the balance between sense and bond, the sort of strategic nature and the more tactical or operational nature? And when we looked at our visualization of our objectives in our digital journey, kind of saw that we get a view of the end-to-end. We have supply there on the left-hand side, and we have demand on the right-hand side. So we see that we've got this kind of balance, and clearly there's supply and demand between each of the nodes, but we've got that kind of balance. It made sense. And then when we looked at sense and respond, as I mentioned, we've kind of got that sensing strategic element. It gets a bit into tactical, and then how do we drive into the handling of actually getting stuff done? And we sort of put ourselves in a range there as well. So with that model, we kind of broke out the supply chain. We put the buckets of sense and respond and dropped our processes where we thought we were in there, and then looked at where we had gaps. So we looked at a gap. Where's my pointer? We looked at a gap in terms of extending our S&OP process. So our S&OP process kind of stopped here with manufacturing. How could we extend it out to our suppliers? How could we develop the collaboration there and think better? So there was an opportunity to extend our S&OP process, opportunity to be more inclusive MPI in our process. We needed to think about distribution capacity. How can we make our logistics a little more agile? And how could we get closer to the customer, or have some technology that started to sense demand? And they were all in the sort of sense realm. And when you went down to the respond realm, we kind of had, is there a way that we can get closer to our customer with VMI in terms of, managing the shipments and giving them visibility and things like that of operational, shipments, executions? And how can we get better into our manufacturing organization and better integrated with our MES systems, our manufacturing execution systems, how they sync up, get more real time, and how can we tie into industry 4.0, functionality and capability? So we looked at those gaps and said, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then we started to overlay them to our work streams and said, where are we thinking about these capabilities? And we clearly saw that customer VMI gap. We have a supply chain customer experience team work stream with a lead that's looking at a strategy there. And we're thinking about how do we, collaborate with our different sorts of customers. And I'll touch on collaboration in a couple of slides. And what sort of capabilities do we have there? With IoT connected machines, there's opportunities to get similar to retail, similar to point of use information when our consumables get used. Is there some value that we can get, an insight that we can give to the customer to give them, a more Amazon-like experience? Can we make suggestions about what they should be placing in their cart online to buy from us, based on what we know that they've been using? So there was an opportunity to enrich and increase the customer experience. Distribution capacity and distribution optimization, total no-brainer, slam dunk. There's a real good opportunity for us. We need to be able to do that to maintain our agility. In terms of sourcing, we were thinking about extending the S&OP process. As I said, how do we partner better with our suppliers? How do we do a similar collaboration effort? Like I said, I'll touch on that in a bit with suppliers. And how do we include, new products more holistically in our S&OP process? We clearly need to get some end-to-end visibility so that we can make the right decisions in all of these nodes in concert, so that we're not doing things in silos. We want to leverage advanced analytics to get at some demand sensing and different forecasting algorithms there and opportunities. And then over in the advanced planning, some of them started to stack up, sensing, optimization. We saw all of those opportunities. So these gaps actually fell into some of the work streams that we had existing, and some of them were actually digital. So the customer VMI thing, that is something that could drive additional value. There's an opportunity there versus maybe distribution optimization or capacity, where it might be just digitization of a process that's not very efficient, and we could drive some opportunity out of that. So in terms of, I said I was going to touch on the collaboration, and I just have a couple of slides to give a point of view on that lens there. So one of the challenges we're thinking about when we looked at collaboration with these different stakeholders, whether it be the supplier or whether it be the customer, was there was a focus internally. It was very silo based. We didn't really understand the complexity or the customer impact of collaboration. The processes weren't integrated. There was a lot of rework in the processes as we communicate. It was a reactive approach, and there was lack of true visibility. All this leading up to a slower growth with these partnerships. Our growth could be much more collaborative and much quicker with our customers and our suppliers if we thought about the way that we were collaborating with them. So just the way that the systems integrate in terms of the supplier network there, or the customer network, or the way that we functionally integrate, there was a lot of challenges around it. So what we thought was we start to think about creating different personas. So if you think about, on the customer side, as I said, there's multiple different types of customers. There's those big sequencing shops where maybe they've got a procurement department, there is a buyer there, there's a supply chain person, they get ERP planning and replenishment. That's one persona, and they're going to have very different requirements to maybe a lab manager, Lana, there on the left, who's really interested in making sure that the projects are running on time and all of the sequencing is getting done and everything, versus Earl, who is the decision maker, and maybe his role is going to be thinking more about the finding the funding and longer term investments. So we really needed to think about the customer and segment our key stakeholders into these buckets, because they might have different needs in terms of how we collaborate with them. Similarly, on the supplier side, we were trying to think about what are the different touch points for end-to-end collaboration. How do we differentiate our suppliers between core suppliers, strategic suppliers, that sort of stuff, and really be focused about how we're going to communicate with them and do it in a more robust way, and how can we think about leveraging technology to do that. So there were the 2 points on collaboration. I don't know how I am for time. Did I go over, Randy? I think that's the last slide. Yeah.
I think you're good with time, Leon. Thank you very much for going through this and sort of setting the stage. So before we get into questions and commentary, we're going to go ahead and shift to Sabu. Sabu, give you an opportunity to react to what you've seen and heard, as well as sort of give us the Gilead perspective as it pertains to this.
No, thank you so much, Leon, for sharing the point of view and approach from Illumina. Excellent to learn the evolution of the transformation and how you're looking at digital transformation being the theme to advance your roadmap and shift focus to the strategic priorities in the supply chain space. So what I would like to share and socialize here is another aspect of this dialogue, so to speak, to bring Gilead's perspective on the recent COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has introduced some of the paradigm shift and learnings from Gilead's standpoint. And this does impact all of us in some shape and form. And COVID-19 has been a game changer for Gilead's supply chain strategy. And I know Randy at the beginning mentioned that we have to keep agnostic of any specific products and all, but anything that I'm sharing here, disclaimer, it's all publicly known information. I'm not sharing any trade secret or anything of that nature. You may be aware that 2 of our medicines, Gilead's medicines, remdesivir and now commonly known as Veklury and Ambisome, have been at the forefront of bringing hopes to thousands of patients worldwide. But it didn't occur naturally to Gilead supply chain to be able to scale up and sustain this unprecedented situation, right? We had one of our products going through the clinical studies when the COVID-19 struck US, and it became really the emergency situation that we had to react. And with the surge of COVID-19 cases last year in US and around the world, we had the social responsibility to make millions of doses available for the patients, right? And we learned for the first time how to file something called as EUA, or Emergency Usage Authorization, for our products, which is still going through the clinical due diligence and clinical rigor with the regulators. And that was a total different path, unlike the typical manufacturing at risk that we follow for a happy path commercial scenario, right? And at one point, we had upwards of about 15 different partnerships to scale up both our manufacturing and distribution and all that. We did all of this in the past year and a half. And there has been a lot of lessons learned along the way. So we are now really looking back, and with the onset of all these vaccines and everything working out hopefully effectively, and we still have a long way to go. But we are trying to reflect on all of these lessons learned and how we have taken this journey so far, and how we can be better prepared and transition over or transform over to a more proactive supply chain in the future state. And one of the core themes we are trying to build and prioritize at the strategic level is to embark on a multi-phase, multi-year digital transformation to introduce a series of transformative initiatives to benefit our supply chain, manufacturing, and quality organization. One of the core themes that we are trying to deliver or transform is something that we are calling as a lot level jurisdiction control. And what that means is, end of the day, we have the responsibility to release our products to all different countries in full compliance with the country-specific regulatory rules. Now, connecting this back to the once-in-a-lifetime experience that I had when we released one of our products through the emergency usage authorization, that was eventually used with millions of patients when the clinical study was still not complete. How do we right-size our supply chain? And how do we prepare for the actual commercial labor when we are anticipating the FDA approval, the EMA approval, and things like that? So these are the two speed challenges that we experienced that we didn't have a proven path to take in the past. But we could only come this far in manufacturing all of our products and really get it out of the way. But when we put a label on that, whether that's for emergency usage authorization or full commercial approval, that's where we were hitting the bottleneck. And that was really trying to slow our supply chain, even though we had all the necessary ingredients to scale up the supply and distribution. We were trying to work through the regulatory restrictions, if you would, and a lot of manual work, a lot of cross-checking and controls that were coming into play to make sure that whatever products we release to the markets is in full compliance with the country-specific regulatory rules, whether it is for emergency usage versus the actual full regulatory commercial approval. That's one of the core lessons learned. So in order to get us to the next level of transformation, what we are trying to, or what we are hopeful to deliver is a feature called lot level jurisdiction control. And we are really looking at the digital transformation to give us capabilities such as the regulatory information management system, or RIM, and then some of the core ERP capabilities offered by technologies such as SAP, and how we can integrate all of those to embark on this very promising and transformative journey over the next few years, so that next time around we need to accommodate, or we need to be ready for this type of a situation in the future, we don't scramble around, and we already have or we should have one model to look at, and we should be more proactive than reactive in the future state. That's something that I was curious to learn from Leon's experience and looking at Illumina's strategy, and seems like it's really giving us a nice framework to look at, and then try to fit our lot level genetics and control model into this control tower and some of these mechanisms that Leon socialized here. And I see there is a room that we can fit all of this concept into the overall framework that Leon presented. That's really the point of view that I would like to bring from Gilead's standpoint. And I see a lot of similarities between the approach that Leon presented and where we are taking our next phase of transformation at Gilead.
Thank you, Sabu, for sharing the Gilead perspective as it pertains to this. So what we're going to do now is, as I said earlier, we do want this to be an interactive session where we can all help one another. As Leon mentioned earlier, before some of you joined, this is a living document. This strategic approach that they're taking, and Sabu seemed to intimate that as well. So any advice and guidance we can provide them about our own experiences to help them get further along the digital transformation journey would be greatly beneficial. I saw that Richard Dahl had posted a question, Leon. So Richard, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and you can ask your question directly, or if you prefer that I read it off, I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, I can
Hey,
see
well, my question went back to his opening comment. A lot has been talked about strategy, which leads everything else into the activity. So if you get the strategy wrong, you're kind of going to go down the wrong path. I'd like to know what Leon, how he defines digital supply chain strategy. You mentioned it right off first and said it was part of it. It was a subgroup of the supply chain strategy, which probably means it's a subgroup of the corporate strategy. So what components go into a successful and a got a half a chance of succeeding digital supply chain strategy?
Yeah.
Right, at this point, say looking ahead 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question, Richard. I would say that this isn't formulaic. I think Randy alluded to it. It's a fairly living document. And I think the first thing I need to say is there needs to be a problem that I need to solve, right, with some sort of technology. Now, at the moment, if there's a problem, I'm solving it either with people or very manually. So the digital side is just going to try and make that easier. It's not necessarily or eradicate it, right? So there isn't a building for me, and this is why I welcome this sort of feedback. There isn't necessarily this is our strategy. There is a vision that we create. This is what we want to aspire to try and achieve. And I guess if I was thinking about the components or building blocks, is like, what's that vision? What does it look like? What are the capabilities that you need to be able to do that? Then you basically take what we took is we did a gap analysis and said, right, what capabilities have we got that we just had and haven't enabled? Or what do we need to go and brainstorm and blueprint and then try and fund and invest? What value is that going to deliver? Because obviously I've got to do a business case for an investment. And then if it makes the right decision, we go through the process of doing it and then making sure that we deliver the investment that we thought we were going to do. They were the components. So essentially the first take of it was, what do we think it should look like? What have we got and we haven't used? How do we roadmap turning them on? What haven't we got? How much value is that going to deliver? And then how do I go about funding it and achieving it? They were the steps. I wouldn't say that they were components or it was like a formulaic way of creating a strategy, because it changes. Technology changes and the business changes, and there might be a need that I didn't know existed. And then all of a sudden I've got to try and find a solution for that. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, Richard, but that was the approach and the logic. of how it fitted in. My first slide was really, as we think about the vision and mission and putting together the strategy to achieve that as the overall supply chain, what we have typically done before is thought about it, you know, functionally, or we had some different views before as we built the vision and strategy together before. We really started to break it down a bit and specifically call out the digital need rather than it being, you know, a supporting cast actor. It really needed to be, you know, in the limelight to have that focus and support to drive the opportunity there, versus just, you know, being an and we've got to do the technology and think about digital opportunities. That was the premise.
So Leon, it seems like, based on what I heard you say there and before, I think there were some thoughts given to what are those breakthrough opportunities that we want to take advantage of. Or you talked about starting with the customer experience portion of this, and then looking at supplier collaboration. So I believe you identified potential opportunities. And then I know in one of your previous talk, you kind of talked about the way you all approach modernizing your operational backbone, so that you're in position to take advantage of emerging technologies to give you not only digital capabilities, but to give you those transformative business capabilities that you're going to need to compete in the future.
Yeah, there some of this. So, yeah, how can I put that? So in that first slide, and I don't want to pop it up because my computer will be funny again, right? But there was the different work streams, and then underneath was all of the other parts of the supply chain strategy. One of those is scale and efficiency, and the other one is growth. Scale and efficiency is clearly pitched in at digitization or digitalization, and just taking away transactions and trying to automate and working by exception. The growth bit is around partnerships, collaboration, and how we can do that. So we support those functions, and we want to create the backbone that gives us the ability to extend that. We created the backbone operationally or even architecturally to come to one platform. That was another decision that we made, and tried to have, how can I put it, unified data, so that we weren't trying to look at the inefficiency of moving information between different systems. Another one that I'll throw out there that wasn't on the slides, it's in the intelligent visibility or control tower work stream. I mean, I'm sure everybody understands. We could have a whole session on control tower, right? What does it mean? But there are multiple different control towers. So, you know, there might be a manufacturing control tower. There could be a supply chain control tower. There could be a logistics control tower. One of the other premises was, how do we wrap that all together so that you're not looking in multiple different places? And there's technology out there that enables you to support all of these different things into one place and string it together in a workflow view. So we were thinking about that sort of technology as well. There was a capability to be able to do that, and how did we weave that in? So to Randy's point, underpinning it operationally so that we can scale. So we picked the platform, we picked unified data, we're trying to see and have the ability to get bigger. And then we also wanted to have the ability to scale our visibility by not having it in one platform. If you know what I mean, we might have different reporting tools or different control towers. I needed visibility or something to wrap them all together. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So Boo, what about on the Gilead side? When I imagine you all have gone through a road mapping exercise as well. And as I have seen, typically when very large organizations go into these digital roadmaps, we all go in with a notion of certain initiatives that we think are going to get traction, and they don't. And then we also come out of it with initiatives that we never thought about. So with that regard, what is it that you went into your roadmap and thinking this is going to be a sure thing, but it wasn't? And what did you come out with, something that wasn't really on the radar?
That's an excellent question, Randy, and it does tie back to the last topic that Leon covered in response to Richard's question. How do we define our goals, or how do we set our aspirations or ambitions as part of our corporate strategy? that's also something certain organizations define or redefine or evolve year over year, right? So we pay close attention at Gilead to the corporate strategy that comes out at the beginning of every year, and certain organizations do that differently, but it's not something that happens net new. It's always a continuation of overall 10-year strategy. Like for an example, some organization may have over the next 10 years or 15 years, we would like to bring 15 different transformative therapies in the space of, let's say, oncology or oncology or gene therapy, whatever may be the case, right? And then we try to connect those aspirations or ambitions to our departmental goals, our business function goals and all. And this is nothing new or rocket science, right? Every organization do that slightly differently, but that's more or less how we operate, right? So this is where people at my level, middle level management, we take a closer look at the delta that we have been following over the past 5 years versus last year's corporate priorities, and what has been the delta, and how do we react to that delta? What tactical level reset in the roadmap we'll need to do in order to meet our longer term as well as short term priorities. It's always going to be, hey, let's go after the low hanging fruits, the short term goals, but lose track of the longer term goals, right? And that's really a constant iterative process that doesn't happen. It should not happen, bottoms up or top down all the time. It has to happen, from bottom to top, top to bottom, as well as sideways. As long as that chain of communication is there, I think we should be on the right track. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to piggyback off that. The example that you gave of that evolution, as you maybe to Randy's question, you went in expecting something, but came out with something else. I'll give a worked example that ties to our work streams and initiatives there. When we were thinking about customer experience, our capability that everybody went to was VMI. We're going to manage their inventory for them, right? And well, why do I want to take on the ownership of doing that was one question that I kind of put out there. But yeah, we're thinking about the customer and ultimately the patient, and it's the right thing to do. As we went into that and we thought about, well, okay, what does that really mean? Everybody says VMI, but what does it mean? We started to have a bit of a brainstorm, and to Zabu's point, it actually brought out something that we never thought about, and it actually transformed from what we were calling VMI to actually to something else. We're now calling it digital fulfillment optimization. So we threw the digital word in there. I think, Richard, that's another strategy. Put digital on something and it gets a bit of traction. So we call it digital fulfillment optimization. There is actually some logic behind that. As we poked around at it, and the fact that our machines are IoT connected, we have lots of data science applications that our teams create internally that look at performance of the machines and how can we optimize it and make sure that all of the patient results are 100% accurate and we're getting the best out of it for the customer. We can also get that information on consumption and usage, and as I was saying, start to think about how to deliver them a more Amazon experience. So whilst we might not have to physically manage their inventory and go into their site and refill their freezers, we can help add value to them by seeing the consumption after we understand what their inventory is system-wise and proposing in their Amazon cart, this is what you need to go order. So I don't need to know for you to go and do all of that analysis. I'm telling you what you need to go order. You just literally have to click accept and we'll ship it to you. There was that kind of premise. So we thought VMI meant white glove, people there having an Illumina persona on site at the customer, opening and closing refrigerators. It didn't really need to be that complicated. Now, for some, maybe it does. And this comes back to the customer segmentation. How do we know which customer wanted what, and how do we want to collaborate with them, and how much, how closeness do we need? that was another thing that came out. We went in thinking about BMI and came out with a totally different solution, purely based on technology. Our instruments, the IoT connection, using some heuristics and planning and integrating it into a myolumina cart, that sort of digital integration we never considered. And it came out of the investigation of saying, let's look at a capability that we think we need, and kind of explore it a bit. So that was how we approached that.
I love that, Leon, because we often see far too often many organizations, whether it's in life sciences or outside, when they start a digital journey, they start with technology.
Yeah.
And that is it's a trap that often leads to overspending and very little realization of value from those investments. But when we focus more on the capabilities, then we're able to have a better match with respect to technologies that are in the marketplace, or maybe there are technologies that we're waiting to even come into the marketplace, but we're not leading with technologies. We're leading with what we need to be able to do to, one, separate us from competitors, while at the same time ensure that we go above and beyond what the customers expect.
Yeah, it kind of comes back. There needs to be some sort of vision or problem statement. I'm not just into, I'm not implementing this technology because, oh, it's the new version of such, and I should do that. I really need to know whether I'm that investment. I'm going to go and ask for millions of dollars from Kevin to say, can I go and do this? And he's going to say, what's the value? Why do you need to do it? What's the problem that you're trying to solve by this new shiny toy? And I know that you like shiny toys, Leon, because you'll say that, and I'll say, yeah, you're right. And another bit, I'll be candid with everybody on the call. There's no surprise. When I first entered into this whole integrated planning vision, I said, yeah, look, this is where we need to go. We've done the brainstorming, the capabilities. This is what we need to go and do. There you go, Kevin. It's going to cost me this millions of dollars. And he said, okay, yeah, great. Let's poke at that a little bit. What are the processes that were involved here? What are the capabilities that you're trying to drive? And we had a bit of back and forth. And then he basically said, look, I think you better go fix the process first before you go invest in these shiny toys. And then that will make you pause for thought and say, actually, now that I fixed the process, I think the toys I've got already are pretty cool. I pumped the tires up on my Ferrari, on my, I don't know, Audi, and now it goes. I don't need a Ferrari. I've got an Audi, and I can pimp it out if I want and do some stuff, and it'll be great. So there's always that realization. I guess the other takeaway is don't be blinded by the technology or the buzzword. Really think about the problem you're going to solve. One more worked example, Randy, and everybody, please interrupt me or I'll just fill the gap. DDMRP as a concept. I was really excited about it. Wow, game changing. I'm going to see, well, how can I do that? Because I'm a planning geek, not just technology, I plan. And I'm like, well, yeah, this is great. Thinking about it, I kind of floated it out there in multi-year roadmap to think about it. And as I came closer to actually thinking, do I need to put a business case together to do this, and poked at it, there really wasn't a problem for me to solve to justify making a completely different change in my planning methodology. I see the value, and for the right set of products and the right business, I think it's great, and I think that was the right thing to do. But as I maybe get a bit older, I stopped chasing the shiny toy and really thought about, well, what problem is that going to solve? Why do I need to go and invest? And whilst it might be great, there's going to be a lot of pain, implementation, long hours. I'm not going to get the bang for buck in doing that right now, because I haven't got a problem that's a burning platform for me to go and do it. So I think that's the other thing that you have to be mindful of. And for me, blockchain was another one. So I think blockchain, great capability. Oh, that's wow. There's certainly opportunity for that. And I'm still struggling a bit to find out what that is. But in the interests of stopping talking, lot level jurisdiction and control, Sabu, is blockchain a kind of candidate there, conceptually?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We are exploring the blockchain as a potential vehicle to get us the right level of a lot level jurisdiction control. Absolutely. But I would say culturally, Gilead so far hasn't been at the forefront of kind of jumping on any net new technology without any proven promise for the longer term. But we are kind of cautiously optimistic that maybe blockchain is a solution to our lot level jurisdiction control. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to do here, and then Leon, I'm going to come back to you to where you can then pose questions to everyone else, is I recognize that every organization on this call or that will go back and watch the roundtable may not be at the level of maturity of a Gilead or Illumina. So when you think about that, for those who are still in the midst of just fighting fires day in and day out, and are really trying to figure out how do we get the motivation, how do we get the impetus or the traction we need to move forward, what would be that starting point that you would recommend for them?
That's a good question. I guess it really does. The first thing is looking for the problem to solve. What are the pain points, and seeing is there. The first step, if you're really in that mode of firefighting and trying to find the bandwidth to just get the time to think about it, my first step would say, is there a digitization opportunity to enable me to get the bandwidth to be able to start to think strategically? I need to try and at least get myself to a place where I'm not dealing day to day with this, but I've got the mental ability to be able to continuously think forward. That's the challenge. So rather than just being an annual exercise where I get together with my leadership team and we think about what are the great things that we want to do, we create a strategy, we sell it to my boss, I get some funding, we do some projects, but then reality bites and I've got to go and fix this production line or ship this thing to a customer or go to a warehouse or whatever and do this, and I don't quite get the time to not continuously, but regularly think about this living document. I think that's the first thing I would approach is there a way that I can get efficiency and automate these processes that give me or my organization the bandwidth to take a step back and say, right, now that that's working, it's not ideal, but how do I then think about the capabilities that I do want and think about the roadmap of going from A to B? That's why I say it's all a bit overwhelming and everybody says we should be doing digital and it's digital transformation here and there. There really needs to be a problem to solve, and then B, once you get the mental ability to be able to start thinking about it, how do I build that together into a vision with these capabilities that I want to deploy that are going to deliver this value over time to the business? It doesn't happen by magic. I will say I kicked off this conceptually in Illumina about 6 months after I joined in 2016. So let's say January 2017 is when I really started to think about the future. And even then I was thinking through a process improvement lens and just bits of technology that would help me in the future. I was building that backbone, as Randy said, that infrastructure. And then it was only really maybe 2 years after that in 2019 that I started to pull together everybody else's digital requirements and break it down into work streams and start to build a plan and think about how it tied into strategy. And then in 2020, Kevin included it in the global supply chain strategy as a work stream in itself, as a breakthrough objective, as opposed to it being, as I said, a supporting function for many years for logistics. So we're doing this technology. I think it was people process technology might have been the way that we kind of figured out the strategy before, but years ago. And we changed it. We changed it around. It became its own breakthrough objective. And I support all of the other objectives in growth, compliance, people, in that aspect, as well as actually planning. This is for fun.
Sabu, anything you'd like to add to that?
Sorry, was it a question to me, Randy?
Yeah, I would say, is there anything you would like to add relative to that in terms of for organizations that may not be as mature or advanced in this space? What kind of guidance would you give them?
No, I think Leon was spot on. Just that the perspective that I would like to share from Gilead's standpoint, at some point you or Leon might have mentioned that, mature organizations like Illumina or Gilead, may not have some of the challenges at the tactical or the operations level. I'll talk for Gilead. We do have challenges at the operations level as well. And
so do we.
Yeah. The cultural reflection that I would like to socialize from Gilead standpoint is we are a very operationally focused organization. So we live by operations, we die by operations. That's our number one priority. When it comes to whether it is COVID-19 or the black fungus situation, hitting India or whatever, everything, divert all the attention to operations to make sure that we deliver the right medicine in the hand of patients in the right time. That's our number one priority. That's our commitment from manufacturing, supply chain, regulatory quality. So at the same time, let's not totally drop the strategic priorities and all. It's a right balance between operational priority and the strategic focus. So I would say the operational priority creates the need for strategic focus. That's how we have evolved as an organization. I mean, I have been in Gilead for about 7 years. When I started in Gilead, we were barely a 7,000 employee organization. Right now, we have close to 12,000 or 13,000 full-time employees. But in this 7 years, I have seen huge transformation and more focus on strategic efforts than the operational focus that we used to have back in 2014, 2015 timeframe. And there is, more of a realization and recognition at the management level that strategic efforts are going to pave the path for operational excellence. So even though we operate, we always prioritize our operations. If we lose track of the strategic initiatives, then we'll never be able to improve or introduce continuous improvement on the operations. So spend 1 hour today on the strategic priorities to save 10 hours tomorrow or next month or next year. That's the only takeaway that I have from the Gilead experience.
Okay, thank you. Leon, is there anything you'd like to ask the group?
Yeah, I just maybe some feedback. Anything that other people have had experience with that we might have missed, or any other feedback that anybody wants to share in chat or on the phone. Like I say, it's a living document. I think, we went through the process of external validation, with a partner like Gartner, but actually think there's much more value for us having this roundtable and conversations to real people that do the work and not just a consultant that I'm paying money to. So, that's where the rubber hits the road. We're really doing it. So any feedback, questions that anybody has would be really welcome.
So Leon, one thing I didn't see, and you just may not have talked about it, is the supply chain vision here could appear to be moving at a faster pace than the enterprise is able to consume. And so given the fact that we have so many organizational silos across many entities here, that's the one thing I didn't really hear you talk about. How have you been able to bring those internal partners on board so that they feel like they're advancing as your functional area advances?
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. So I guess I didn't call it out, but one of the other things as part of my role, I guess, to facilitate this happening was there was a lot of cross-functional influencing that we had to do. So I had to make sure I build the relationships and direct and influence to a certain extent our IT organization, our commercial organization, our finance organization, our quality organization. And through doing that, what I actually became, I shouldn't have done it really, But I became on the steering committees for all of these other breakthrough objectives, or all of these other organizational digital roadmaps. So if we're talking about things commercially with, with our e-com platform, I became, present on that e-com steering committee to make sure that we understood the relationships between each of these. So we basically, through influencing and building relationships, I created that connection to all of these other strategies. So I understood this direction that we're taking from a technology point of view in finance is going to have an impact over here in procurement or whatever, or what we're doing here in quality is going to have an impact on material movement. So that maybe that's another tip in creating all of these, is make sure that you start to think about your key stakeholders in each of these other business functions, and see how what they're doing will interact. Digital fulfillment optimization, that customer experience one, is a huge collaboration with commercial, right? Because my concept is that we could then, tie it into our e-commerce platform, and I don't own that. That's over in commercial to do, and how they're managing the sales force and how they're, interfacing with the customer. So we had to build those relationships and have those mechanisms where we can, all keep aligned on what our capabilities are and our technology roadmaps. So that's a good call out, Randy.
Perfect. Thank you, Leon. So we are now at the top of the hour, and this is a conversation that, again, we will continue for some time. Leon, I want to thank you for bringing Illumina's approach to the forefront. And Sabu, thank you for bringing the Gilead perspective. For those of you who are not part of our digital transformation steering committee, we absolutely welcome your participation. We want to have more roundtables like this, and at any time, feel free to drop any one of us a line, letting us know other topics that you'd like us to discuss, or if you're a member, which of your companies you want to come to the forefront and take the stage next. So guys, it's been a great pleasure spending this past 55 minutes with you. We're gonna let you get back to your day, and thank you for coming. Look forward to talking with you soon. Take care.
Thanks,
all.
everybody. Thanks, Sabu. Thanks, Randy. Thanks all.
Leon, tell Kevin I said hi.